Mount Hermon. Why this mountain keeps appearing in dark traditions. One mountain witnessed the angelic rebellion that corrupted the antediluvian world, served as ground zero for pagan worship for 3 millennia, and today sits at the epicenter of Middle Eastern conflict. Why does Mount Hermon appear again and again in the darkest moments of biblical and human history? What happened on that mountain that marks it as a place of cosmic significance and ongoing spiritual warfare? Tonight, we're going to trace Mount Hermon's hidden history, from the angelic oath in the Book of Enoch, through Canaanite Baal worship, Greek and Roman paganism, the transfiguration of Christ, Islamic conquest, crusader battles, and modern geopolitical conflict. We'll examine why this specific mountain keeps appearing as a threshold between the earthly and the supernatural. We'll start with the mountain's geography and ancient name. Then we'll examine the Book of Enoch's account of the Watcher's descent. We'll trace Canaanite, Greek, and Roman worship sites. We'll look at the mountain's role in biblical narratives, including the Transfiguration. We'll follow its significance through Islamic history and the Crusades, and we'll examine its modern strategic importance and ongoing spiritual implications. This is Hidden Histories. Mount Hermon sits at the southern end of the anti-Lebanon mountain range, where the borders of Israel, Syria, and Lebanon converge. At 9,232 feet, it's the highest mountain in the region, visible for miles in every direction, dominating the landscape. The mountain actually consists of 3 peaks. Snow covers the summit most of the year, unusual for the Middle East, making it a water source for the entire region. The Jordan River's headwaters originate from springs at Hermon's base. In Hebrew, it's called Har Hermon, but the ancient texts give it other names that hint at its dark history. Deuteronomy chapter 3 verse 9 records, Hermon is called Syrian by the Sidonians. The Amorites call it Sinir. Multiple names for one mountain. Each culture that encountered it gave it a designation. But the name that stuck, Hermon, comes from the Hebrew root herum, meaning devoted to destruction or set apart. Set apart for what? In ancient times, Hermon marked the northern boundary of the Promised Land. Joshua chapter 11 verses 16 to 17 describes Joshua's conquests. So Joshua took this entire land, all the Negev, the whole region of Goshen, the western foothills, the Arabah, and the mountains of Israel with their foothills, from Mount Halak, which rises toward Seir, to Baal Gad, in the valley of Lebanon, below Mount Hermon. Baal Gad, literally Baal of Fortune, a Canaanite worship site at Hermon's base. The mountain was a border, but borders in the ancient world weren't just political, they were spiritual. Mountains were seen as meeting places between heaven and earth, thresholds where divine and human realms intersected. Mount Hermon was the ultimate threshold, and according to ancient Jewish texts, something catastrophic happened there before the flood. Something that marked it forever. The Book of Enoch, written approximately 200 BC, quoted in the New Testament book of Jude, provides the most detailed account of what happened on Mount Hermon. Enoch chapter 6 verses 1 to 6 describes the event. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semjaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him, and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared, on the summit of Mount Hermon. Read that carefully. 200 angels descended specifically to Mount Hermon. They didn't descend randomly across the earth. They chose this mountain deliberately, and they took an oath. They bound themselves together with curses, mutual imprecations, because each feared to commit the transgression alone. The collective oath shared the guilt, spreading responsibility so no individual could back out. Enoch chapter 6 verse 6 even specifies, "And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it." The mountain's name comes from the oath, Hermon, devoted to destruction, because the angels devoted themselves to transgression there. What followed is described in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1-4, and elaborated in Enoch. The angels, called watchers, took human women as wives. They taught humanity forbidden knowledge, weapon-making, cosmetics, sorcery, astrology, the working of metals, enchantments. Their offspring were the Nephilim, giants who consumed all resources and then began consuming humans themselves. But the key point for our investigation, it started on Mount Hermon. The mountain was the landing site, the oath location, the place where heaven and earth were breached in rebellion. God's response was judgment. The watchers were imprisoned in darkness, the Tartarus mentioned in 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4, and the everlasting chains of Jude verse 6. The flood destroyed the corrupted world, but the memory of what happened on Hermon persisted, and cultures that arose after the flood remembered. They came to Hermon. They worshipped there. They tried to reconnect with what had happened. Because if Mount Hermon was where angels descended once, perhaps it could happen again. By the time Israel entered Canaan around 1400 BC, Mount Hermon was already a center of pagan worship. The Canaanites, descendants of Ham through his son Canaan, practiced religion that the Bible describes as among the most evil in the ancient world, and much of it centered on Hermon. Joshua chapter 11 verse 17 and chapter 12 verse 7 both mention Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon below Mount Hermon. Baal Gad means Baal of fortune, or Lord of Fortune. Archaeological evidence suggests this was a major cultic center, a place where Canaanites worshipped Baal, hoping for prosperity and divine favor. But who was Baal? The name means Lord or Master. In Canaanite religion, Baal was a storm god, a fertility deity, the son of El, the chief god, who died and was resurrected annually. Sound familiar? The dying and rising god mythology that would later appear in Greek and Roman religion, Tammuz, Adonis, Osiris, has roots in Canaanite Baal worship. Throughout Scripture, Israel is repeatedly condemned for worshipping at high places, mountain shrines dedicated to Baal and Asherah. Hermon was the ultimate high place. Its elevation, its snow-capped peaks visible across the region, its association with the Watcher's descent, all made it a prime location for seeking supernatural contact. The Canaanites practiced ritual prostitution, child sacrifice, and divination at these sites. 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 24 describes how these practices entered Israel. There were even male shrine prostitutes in the land. The people engaged in all the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. Why does this matter? Because the Canaanites weren't just making up random religious practices. They were attempting to recreate what their ancestral memory told them had happened on Hermon. Contact between divine beings and humans, the production of hybrid offspring, the acquisition of forbidden knowledge. Baal worship was an attempt to reconnect with the pre-flood corruption, and Hermon was ground zero. When Israel conquered Canaan, they were specifically commanded to destroy these worship sites and drive out the inhabitants. But they didn't complete the task. Joshua chapter 13 verses 2-6 lists the land that remained unconquered, including much of the Hermon region. This is the land that remains, all the regions of the Philistines and Geshurites, from the Shihor River on the east of Egypt to the territory of Ekron on the north, the area of Byblos, and all Lebanon to the east, from Baal Gad below Mount Hermon to Lebo Hamath. The worship sites around Hermon remained, and they would continue to function for centuries, drawing pagans and apostate Israelites seeking supernatural power. When Alexander the Great conquered the region in 332 BC, Hellenistic culture brought new gods, but to the same old mountain. At the southwestern base of Mount Hermon, where springs gushed from caves to form the Jordan River's headwaters, the Greeks established a worship center for Pan, the god of wild places, shepherds, and rustic music. Pan was depicted as half man, half goat, a hybrid being, a fusion of human and animal. Sound familiar? The Greeks called the site Panias. It featured a massive cave called the Cave of Pan, believed to be a gateway to the underworld, a place where the barrier between earthly and supernatural realms was thin. The Jewish historian Josephus described the cave in Antiquities, Book 15, Chapter 10. There is a very fine cave in a mountain, under which there is a great cavity in the earth, and the cavern is abrupt and prodigiously deep, and full of still water. This cavity is called the abyss. The abyss, the same Greek word, abyssos, used in the New Testament for the prison of demons. Why would Greeks build a temple to Pan specifically at Mount Hermon's base? Because the location's reputation as a place where divine and earthly realms intersected was already ancient. They weren't inventing new religion, they were continuing old practices under new names. Later, Herod Philip, son of Herod the Great, expanded the site into a city called Caesarea Philippi in honor of Caesar Augustus and himself. He built temples, shrines, and civic buildings. The city became a center of emperor worship, combined with Pan veneration. Multiple temples stood side by side, to Pan, to Zeus, to the divine Augustus, all at the base of Mount Hermon, all connected to the ancient tradition of supernatural contact at this location. This is the site where Jesus would take his disciples and ask a crucial question. But we'll return to that. The Gospels record that 6 days after Peter's confession of faith, Jesus took Peter, James, and John up a high mountain where he was transfigured before them. Matthew chapter 17 verses 1-5. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then, there appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." The Gospels don't name the mountain. Tradition since the 4th century has identified it as Mount Tabor in Galilee. But there's a problem. Mount Tabor had a fortified city on its summit during Jesus' time. Not exactly a secluded location for a private supernatural encounter. The context provides a better answer. The Transfiguration occurred 6 days after events at Caesarea Philippi, at the base of Mount Hermon. The phrase high mountain in Greek is oros hypsilos, a very high or lofty mountain. Mount Tabor is only 1,886 feet. Mount Hermon is 9,232 feet. The logistical and contextual evidence points to Hermon. If the transfiguration occurred on Hermon, the significance is staggering. Just days earlier, at Caesarea Philippi, at the base of Hermon, in front of the cave of Pan called the Gates of Hades, Jesus had said to Peter in Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." Jesus was standing at a location associated for millennia with demonic activity, supernatural rebellion, and pagan worship, and declaring his authority over it all. Then he went up the mountain, the very mountain where, according to ancient tradition, angels had descended in rebellion. And there, Jesus was transfigured. His divine glory was revealed. Moses and Elijah, representing the law and the prophets, appeared and spoke with him about his coming death and resurrection. The symbolism is profound. Where angels once descended in rebellion, God descended in redemption. Where the supernatural had been accessed for corruption, it was now revealed for salvation. The Father's voice declared, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." At the very location where divine-human boundaries had been transgressed catastrophically, the God-man stood transfigured, the only legitimate union of divine and human nature, the answer to Hermon's ancient corruption. Mount Hermon's strategic and spiritual significance didn't end with the biblical era. When Muslim armies conquered the Levant in the 7th century AD, they recognized Hermon's strategic importance. The mountain provided observation over the entire region. Whoever controlled Hermon could monitor movement for miles. But Islamic tradition also preserved legends about the mountain connected to jinn, spiritual beings in Islamic cosmology, roughly equivalent to demons in Judeo-Christian tradition. Some Islamic sources identify Mount Hermon as a place where jinn were active, where supernatural entities interacted with the earthly realm. The same reputation, persisting across religious traditions. During the Crusades, 1096–1291 AD, control of Mount Hermon changed hands multiple times. The Crusaders built fortresses in the region, including at Banias, ancient Caesarea Philippi, at Hermon's base. They called it Belinas and recognized its strategic value, controlling the route from Damascus to the Mediterranean coast. In 1129, the Crusaders fortified the area. In 1132, it was besieged by Damascus. Control shifted repeatedly, Crusader, Muslim, Crusader again, as both sides fought for this strategic position. Militarily, Hermon dominated the landscape. Whoever held the high ground controlled the region. Under Ottoman rule, 1517–1917, Mount Hermon remained strategically important, but culturally quieter. The explicit pagan worship was long gone, replaced by Islamic control. But the Druze people, a syncretic religious group, settled in the Mount Hermon region and maintained secretive traditions some scholars link to ancient Canaanite and Gnostic practices. The mountain's esoteric reputation persisted, even if mainstream awareness faded. In modern times, Mount Hermon has become one of the most contested pieces of real estate in the Middle East. In June 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel captured the Golan Heights from Syria, including the southern and western slopes of Mount Hermon. The military importance was obvious. Whoever controlled Hermon's Peak could observe Damascus, 40 miles away, and monitor all military movement in the region. Israel established signals intelligence facilities on the mountain, listening posts, radar installations, early warning systems. On October 6, 1973, Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism, Syria launched a surprise attack, including an assault on Mount Hermon. Syrian commandos captured Israel's installations on the mountain. For 2 weeks, Syria controlled the peak, using it to direct artillery fire and monitor Israeli positions. Israeli forces launched a costly counterattack. The battle for Mount Hermon became known as the Battle of the Eyes because of the mountain's intelligence value. Israel recaptured the position on October 22nd, but at heavy cost. Hundreds of casualties on both sides. Today, Mount Hermon remains divided. Syria controls the eastern slopes, Lebanon the northwestern, Israel the southern and western slopes, including the summit. The area is heavily militarized. Israel maintains sophisticated listening posts. The UN maintains a buffer zone. Recent conflicts, particularly the Syrian civil war and Israeli strikes against Iranian positions in Syria, have repeatedly involved Mount Hermon. In February 2018, an Israeli F-16 was shot down during strikes near Hermon. Tensions remain constant. Strategically, Hermon is irreplaceable high ground. Whoever controls it dominates the region. Mount Hermon appears again and again in dark traditions because something happened there that marked it permanently. According to ancient Jewish sources, it was where angels descended in rebellion, taking an oath that corrupted the antediluvian world and necessitated the flood. After the flood, successive cultures, Canaanites, Greeks, Romans, came to Hermon seeking supernatural contact. They built temples, performed rituals, practiced divination and child sacrifice, attempting to reconnect with the pre-flood angelic transgression. Then Jesus came. At Hermon's base, he declared authority over the gates of Hades. On Hermon's summit, likely, he was transfigured, revealing divine glory at the very location of ancient angelic rebellion. Through Islamic conquest, crusader battles, Ottoman rule, and modern warfare, the mountain has remained contested, as if spiritual forces understand its significance even when humans forget. The lessons are profound. First, geographic locations can have spiritual significance. Not all places are equal. Some locations become marked by historical events, natural or supernatural, that give them ongoing importance. Second, spiritual warfare is territorial. The Bible speaks of principalities and powers assigned to regions. Mount Hermon's persistent association with conflict, spiritual and military, suggests ongoing supernatural contestation. Third, Satan's strategies are consistent. From the Watcher's descent to Canaanite Baal worship to modern occultism, the goal remains constant: corrupt humanity, prevent redemption, establish rival authority to God's kingdom. Fourth, Christ's victory is territorial too. Jesus didn't avoid Hermon. He confronted it. He declared authority at its base and was transfigured on its summit, claiming the location that rebellion had marked. Fifth, modern conflicts often have ancient roots. The fighting over Mount Hermon isn't just about military strategy. There's a spiritual dimension. Powers and principalities that have contested this threshold for millennia continue doing so through human agents. The Book of Enoch states the angels descended on Hermon and took an oath because they feared to act individually. They needed collective commitment to transgression. That oath marked the mountain, and the marking persists. Every culture that has encountered Hermon, Canaanite, Israelite, Greek, Roman, Islamic, Crusader, Ottoman, modern, has recognized something different about it. A power, a presence, a significance beyond mere geography. Some sought to exploit it through pagan worship. Some fought to control it through military force. Some understood it as a place where heaven and earth intersect, for good or ill, but all recognized Mount Hermon is not an ordinary mountain. The biblical pattern suggests that locations where supernatural events occur retain significance. The Garden of Eden, though lost, remained guarded by cherubim. Sodom's ruins remained a warning. Jerusalem became the eternal city because God chose it. And Hermon? Hermon became a perpetual threshold, a place where the veil between earthly and supernatural realms grew thin, where contact occurred, where rebellion was attempted and redemption declared. Today, military installations crown its peak. Radar dishes scan the horizon. Soldiers watch for threats, but perhaps they're guarding more than they know. Perhaps the real battle for Mount Hermon isn't between nations, but between kingdoms, the kingdom of God and the dominion of darkness, still contesting a mountain marked by an ancient oath. As Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 reminds us, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Mount Hermon stands as a monument to that struggle. From the Watcher's descent to modern warfare, the mountain that marks the boundary of the Promised Land continues to mark the boundary between earthly and supernatural conflict. The war isn't over. The mountain still stands, and the powers that first claimed it in rebellion still contest it. Against the God who declared his authority there through the transfiguration of his Son, Hermon keeps appearing in dark traditions because the darkness remembers what happened there, and the light has already declared victory over it. This is Hidden Histories. Like, share, and subscribe for more biblical mysteries, ancient truths, and forbidden knowledge revealed daily.